Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Burnettwork. My name is Mmmm, and I am from Positive Fandom. And tonight we have with us Catherine. Catherine Cooke, how are you tonight?
All right.
And guys, today we're going to be talking about Killers of the Flower Moon to do a review of this incredible film that came out just a few weeks ago, Catherine. And you and I have been talking about this film. We talked about it about a week ago. And the film itself is doing moderately well with around 119 million at the box office. And I personally hope it does make more. But to be honest with you, Catherine, when you and I first started to talk about this film, and I still feel the same way about how the film came out, I'm not quite sure how I feel about it. And I do want to talk about it tonight. I haven't really seen very many reviews. I don't know how many people are watching the film or took an interest in it. But Catherine, at the beginning of this year, this film got a lot of buzz and a lot of chatter, didn't it?
Yeah.
I know that at a number of different film festivals, I can't remember if it won awards at which film festivals and when, but it certainly did get a lot of chatter. And certainly we do have high expectations for a Martin Scorsese film with De Niro and DiCaprio, and of course Gladstone, who truly was magnificent in this. And I'm going to say personally, Catherine, there are some elements in this film, especially the crime scenes in this film, because as the title of the film suggests, there are a lot of crime scenes, and they are certainly depicted masterfully and searingly. And of course, there is a book based on this. It's this book of the same name, Killers of the Flower Moon, by David Grant. Are you familiar with the book, and have you read this book, Catherine?
I haven't read it, no, but I'm familiar with it.
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious because I personally have not read the book, but I have heard a lot of what you had to say about it. And, I'm wondering how, in regards to the book, this screenplay that Scorsese has written, co-written with someone, is because of a number of different things I've heard you say. But personally, after seeing this film, Catherine, I think that the production value is incredible and it looks beautiful. And the cinematography is amazing. That costume design is perfect. What did you think about some of those elements of the film?
Yeah, I think the emphasis was more on production value than anything else in this film. Did look very good. They had a lot of photographs from the time period to go off of. They filmed in the same county where all the events took place, same town even, so they were able to do a pretty good job at that.
Yeah, and one of the viewers here on the Burnettwork, his name is JH Edits, talked about how the events of the film took place just down the road from him, and he loves this film. He thinks it's amazing, and certainly I do want to give him credit for putting in the time to even say what he thought about the film, because I don't know very many people who've actually seen the film, although it feels like we've been waiting all year for this film, and of course. The chemistry between De Niro and DiCaprio, as I had mentioned to you before, is undeniable. I mean, honestly, they could just do this whole film and just them talking in a flashback portion. And I think that I would still watch it. They were wonderful in it. But the film did have a lot of stars in it as well. And of course, here's another scene of De Niro playing Hale, this very interesting character in a sense. And I also want to mention that when I think about this film and the way that it was marketed, so to speak, it was pretty clear that we knew we were going to see Lily Gladstone a lot in the film. And she is remarkable as well, although I don't have her picture up here now. She certainly does stand out quite a bit as in playing this lead role, who unfortunately has to sit by and watch as pretty much every family member she knows, becomes a victim to these killings. But I think she's definitely will be nominated for an Oscar performance. What do you think, Catherine? Do you think that she managed to hold her own against De Niro and DiCaprio?
Yeah, she's pretty good. For a while, her performance is very muted. Like, she doesn't want to really give them much of anything. She just kind of mumbles, like, yeah, okay, can we get going? That kind of thing. And then she kind of picks up a bit, and then a lot of her performance is just being sick in bed, because that, unfortunately, is the direction her character goes for way too long in the movie, if you ask me. But yeah, she's pretty good. I like all the actresses they cast there for the sister. That scene there is a really great scene in the movie. their chemistry was just electric, and I wanted to see a lot more of them together, but you don't, of course.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting for a film that certainly does focus on Osage culture. It focuses, as far as I'm concerned, very little of it. We see a lot more of the killings, and we see a lot more of this, sort of parlay between Hale and Ernst, which really does, for me, become such a strong focus of the film. And that's, I think, the intention of the film was for us to be an insider in that. And we certainly did see that. But certainly, even as they're sitting here, and it is a beautiful shot, as you said, Catherine, we do know that, unfortunately, the Osage are clearly under this attack, and they know they're in danger. And they make a lot of comments about it and concerns, and but at the same time, we also see that the Osage have kind of intermingled with other cultures, and they're very comfortable in doing this at this point in the film. But their wealth seems to stand out dramatically against the other groups around them. And the only other person who it doesn't feel like, they're so wealthy and so far out of everybody else's league is perhaps the Hale character, who I'm guessing, Catherine, may not be even nearly in close in wealth to the Osage, but he kind of plays this game as a friend. And of course, he's extremely disgenuine. So there is that part. The other thing that I was going to say that I think is very interesting about the film is that in regards to, some of the main elements here, we see the plan, of course, is for Ernst. And this is not a secret. I'm not really a spoiler in the story because it's history. Ernst has to befriend and marry Molly, and he does manage to achieve this. And, along with his guidance from his uncle. And certainly there is a lot of, parts where I'd say Hale is quite honest and open with Ernst, but Ernst and Hale are trying to keep it under wraps. But Catherine, with so many kind of murders that are so blatant, and so mysterious, and even sometimes just so shocking, it would seem very difficult to kind of keep, this under wraps. It couldn't just be a coincidence at some point. And so, the Osage find themselves in a very difficult situation. Not only are they not able to protect themselves, but they also don't have access to a lot of their own wealth. And so I remember you mentioning, that it is quite shocking to see scenes where she's asking for, what seems to be a pittance for money every now and then just to have something done. And it seems impossible to get it. They are certainly being sort of like kept under, in control by everybody around them. And that must be incredibly frustrating to them. But they're still staying there. Like, they're determined as a people to stay in this area. I also wanted to ask you, Catherine, since we already know that this film, it really is a stunning looking film. I mean, the production value is top notch. Do you have any favorite moments in the film? I don't know why they don't have any better stills.
Not particularly favorite moments, because it all kind of, blends in. Like I was noting that I was kind of annoyed with how much of the movie is from Ernest's perspective, and it's like, because I know that originally the script was he was gonna play the FBI agent Tom White, and it was gonna be a very FBI centric perspective storyline. And then when he changed his mind and decided, no, I want to play this character, they had to rewrite the whole script. And it's like, well, that's almost like you were all on board with making one movie, and you suddenly decided to completely change gears and make another movie just because the lead actor doesn't want to do it anymore. And in this new movie they've made here, it's like, well, who are you making it for? Because the Osage, you don't get their perspective on it very much. You get that brief montage of the killings in the beginning. The chief mentions that we need to do something about this, and you don't see them again for like 2.5 hours later, until the FBI agent shows up. He's like, we're down in scores and hundreds. It's like, well, why aren't we feeling any of that or seeing any of that in this movie? Because atmospherically, it doesn't feel like this is the reign of terror, even though it is, because that was the period that particularly that this film takes place during. But it's only focusing almost exclusively on the Kyle family. And like when they go to get their money, and they don't dive into how the Guardian program was really abused, like how they would be administering their estates, but also be creditors against the estates. They would charge them up the yin yang for all sorts of money. And yeah, the movie mentions that, but they don't mention the fact that they would give them a hand over their land allotments to pay off their debts, which was just swindling the land out from underneath them. Like, oh, we're not going to give you money for this or that. Oh, you have to give us this. and it didn't really dive into why that program was even there. It was because the Congress put it there. You know, kind of like they don't mention that the real reason the FBI comes to investigate is because J. Edgar Hoover needed a win. You know, it's telling a story, but it's not really diving into the whole conspiracy as much. And while the chemistry between these two is really good, and I say this is probably Robert De Niro's best performance in a long, long time, it was a little frustrating with how long the movie is, that it's just these people, and it's like, can we get another perspective on this, or switch gears a little bit? But it's just them the whole time. I'm like, oh, these guys are just, you know. And I was wondering like how Hale exactly got in it, because Henry mentions at the beginning that Hale's, you know, cattle, his house and his cattle ranch is on Henry's own land, and he's clearly doing well for himself already financially. It's like he doesn't need to go out and kill all these people to get their extra money. And like he says to Ernest late in the movie, oh, I've brought them to hospitals and I brought them to schools. It's like, well, how exactly did you do that? And it's like, that's not really something that's covered. Like they see, people gathering and thanking him for donating the ballet school. It's like, well, how much money does this guy have? It kind of sounds like he's already doing really well for himself. And I thought maybe it'd be more interesting to dive into that, but the movie is very paper thin in that it only talks about the Kyle family and that particular conspiracy, but we're not really diving into the whole thing. Kind of like the book. It's a very thin book, and the reviews are all like, yeah, it's all about the Kyle family and all of that. And it's not until the climax where he kind of alludes to how much bigger this conspiracy actually is, but nobody's really done a deep dive on it yet. And I feel I've learned more about the real story from the press junket that there's been, because there've been a lot of news articles and news documentaries about it than I did watching the whole 3.5-hour movie.
Well, that's a very interesting analysis. And just like you, I was very surprised when I saw the film, and about halfway through, I realized that they were not going to necessarily show us what I was presumably expecting from the story. In fact, I think at the end, I felt as much in the dark as I did in the beginning of the film. If I knew nothing about it, I wouldn't know that the story, you know, was mainly focusing on that. In fact, I think that what ends up happening is that, you know, you kind of like dealing with this thorny subject, but you know, the scandal gets lost and overshadowed by other things in the film. And you know, I'm not even quite sure whether the director is aware of that. I think that, you know, from their point of view, what was done and what was produced is considered, you know, a marvel. I mean, it's even in the way that it's being described as this sort of this epic film, but it doesn't feel epic to me.
No, it's just really long, and it's like there's such few details that this movie goes into, and such a limited perspective. There's no reason this movie needs to be 3.5 hours long, and I felt the same way about his last film, The Irishman. It's like the narrative is not strong enough to, with these random vignettes that are just going on and on for 3.5 hours. And it's like the way in the third act it kind of does this weird thing where it kind of wants you to get in Ernest's corner because, oh, he's going to do the right thing now. And of course, this is a spoiler. This is his history. He did decide eventually to testify against his uncle. But it's like, why is the movie framing it this way? It's like, shouldn't we be getting because you see like all the Osage people at the trial sitting behind the prosecution's desk. You see the tribal chiefs from the beginning. You see the other, the guy who mentioned that, oh, I was in the Boxer Rebellion and I knew who my enemy was then. If I knew today, we'd be killing them ourselves. I see those people, but it's like, I want to hear their perspective on this. I want to see what they were thinking about what's going on. And yet it kind of frames it almost like Ernest is, as if he actually loves his wife and all this. And even Scorsese's been saying that on the press junket that, oh, it's a love story. And that's why I told it this way. It's like, no, you can't conspire to murder your wife's entire family from no sooner than you marry her and poison her in a manner which clearly isn't just slowing her down, but bringing her onto her deathbed and say that he's still in love with her. It's like, no, it's like, come on, that's senile to say that. Come on, that's ridiculous. And so that's like and so it felt kind of icky a bit in the climax how they're trying to almost orient it to put you in his corner, like, oh yeah, we're gonna get the bad guys now. It's like, dude, you're a scumbag. It's like you should be hanged for this.
Yeah, I think the description of there being love or romance in this film is just, it's not there. It's not present for even a second. when you look at it. And I think that they didn't even need to boast that. It didn't need to even, and I'm obviously he has to approach her and win her over, but it felt more like a thriller than a love story in a sense. And I think if we were going to call it anything, that's what it was, because it was almost as if, you've seen it where a woman meets a man. He's not the man you thought he was, but he's great. I love him. He would never poison me.
That's the thing that I felt was another key missing scene in the film. Because I'm sure that when, the Ute FBI agent, I can't remember, John, whatever I can't remember what his name is. But when he goes into her room and sees how sick and practically deathly she is, and he takes her to the hospital, inevitably they would have brought the box of the medicine stuff there for them to see, and they would have told her, look, this is insulin because she's diabetic. This here is not, and they would have found out what that other stuff was. And how do you not have the scene where she gets the reaction that, oh my God, because in the final scene when she walks in to ask him that she already knows because they've already told her, but we don't get to see that scene, which I thought would have been a real gut punch and kind of necessary for her to finally realize that this man she's been in love with has actually been turning against him. Because in the real story, when she found out that he was telling the truth, he's like, oh yeah, I did these things and I conspired to murder your sister and blow up her house right across the street from us. She never spoke to him again. And she never wanted to hear his name again. She thought he was just disgusting and wanted nothing to do with it. But the movie's doing this weird thing where they're still meeting. I'm like, how is it after you've been rescued by the agents and taken to the hospital and undoubtedly told what was going on that you're still having like these romantic, like it seemed bizarre that even the FBI agents are the one taking her back to meet him. And it's like, isn't there a primary safety concern here since he's been trying to murder the whole family to get the head rights? It's like, why are you taking her back to him? Like, this is dangerous.
That's a good point. And of course, Catherine, there's that scene where I guess it's their child passes away and he should be in prison, right? And there's the funeral, and I guess they let him out so he could attend the funeral. And
he did have handcuffs on, though.
Yeah, he had handcuffs on, and they're looking at one another. And it was just the one moment where she had some kind of animosity and hate towards him. And I'm thinking to myself, well, she's been building this up for a long time. I think maybe when he started to give her those injections was when she really started to realize something was wrong. Why is this happening to me? Only 1 in 5 people in the world get this, like this really kind of twisted story. And
she told him, she's like, this stuff isn't helping. It's like, I'm telling you right now, it's not working. And he mocked her and was being all racist towards her. And she went along with it anyway. Which is just, like, she had her suspicions, but she wasn't really able to go all the way. Kind of like when she asked him early in the movie, what do you think about your uncle? Do you trust him? Do you like him? Like, she's clearly asking it in a way like she knows something or she suspects something. Like, even when her first sister dies and her husband, Bill, asks, Ernest, you better go outside. And he's like, why? It's like, it'd be better the way things are going for you to just step outside. And they don't reveal why Bill wants to do that in the movie, but it turns out in reality, he was already suspicious that, like, he was even aware of what Hale and Ernest were doing. He couldn't prove it at the time, but he knew it. And it seems like Molly had some kind of suspicions of his uncle because she's like, oh, yeah, there's something wrong with him. And even her sisters were like, you should be careful of these people. Like, no, he's not after my money. He just wants, to be safe and stable. He wants, or what was it, security or whatever it is. And it's like, no, they're on to something there. And it's like she was doubting her instincts, but it seemed like she was suspicious.
Yeah, it really did. And the other thing that I want to ask you about is some people, so like we both agree that this is not a romantic story at all. There's absolutely no romance in this.
Like, from her, for a little bit, she clearly is in love with him, but he clearly is not. No. He objectifies her. Yeah, that's why he has kids with her, but it's not because he loves her, clearly.
Yeah, and I think that he talks about women are his weakness, and he almost makes it sound like he could fall in love with anybody. There's nobody special out there. Women are his weakness, but he likes all women. So it doesn't matter if a woman looks a certain way or not, as long as she's a woman, that's his weakness, right? So the other thing that I was going to ask you about is I've also heard people describe this story as a Western.
Not really. It doesn't feel like it because even in what they call revisionist westerns, which I don't like the term revisionist because it makes it sound like you're rewriting history in a negative way, but because this is authentic, like this actually happened. And just because it's in the Midwest, it is the 20th century, but it doesn't really feel like a western. It's like, you know, you don't really have those same tropes, so to speak. I'm like, yeah, the character of Hale is kind of a stock character in some of those western films, like, you know, the guy who seems to be the likable guy in town, but he's actually the bad guy. But you don't have like big action scenes in this movie per se. You don't have big shootouts between the hero and the villain. You don't have an impending showdown or something like that. It's not. It didn't feel like a western. I've heard people call other movies westerns just because of the setting and, oh well, it's kind of out in the West and there's time. It's like that doesn't necessarily make it a western. Like I think you're right. I think it's much more of a thriller and a
And
tragedy.
And because it's a thriller and a tragedy, what I'm wondering is why they didn't go ahead and make Molly that character where it's true that it does feel as if the film focuses on her and you want the film to focus on her. You want all of it to be from her point of view and you want her to go to make these discoveries. And I think that the implication in the beginning when you see her and she's sitting there asking for money or saying, you know, these things, she wants to press. She wants to continue, but we're not given that necessarily in the story. And perhaps that's fine that we weren't given that. But what I'm saying is it would have made a more interesting tale, even if it were not true, even if she was not pressing, even if she wasn't. But it seemed to imply that this character, her nature is, well, why is this happening? You know, and I've got to find out more. Why not let her find one of these conversations and know before, you know, like, and let him still.
Yeah, because it's like she was suspicious of Hale for a reason, so she must have known something. I mean, I get that this is a true story and they can't change too much of it because obviously she wasn't aware of her husband's involvement until he finally got arrested. But it's like, well, why would you write her questioning in Hale? Like, she knows something. Like, even Bill knew something, but they didn't clue us into why he seemed to. And it seems the way the film is edited that Ernest wasn't in on the scheme at the time that her first sister died. Like, he hadn't yet been roped into it. So when Bill was suspicious of him, I think he was probably just lopping him to get, oh, you're hanging out with your uncle a lot, and your uncle's definitely doing this. So you're behind this. But because the movie seems to frame it as if Ernest is genuinely perplexed. Like, not that he's lying. Like, he genuinely didn't seem to know why Bill's kicking me out of the house. But then he just eases into this plan just so maliciously without even having to be pushed into it, really, you know?
And now another thing that I wanted to mention is we do see a lot of crime. Like there's a lot of crime in this. And, you know, after a while, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with this, but after a while, it is very hard to watch that. And the point is, you know, he made his point, it got across, you know, these killings were absolutely ruthless and quite shocking and, you know, just terrible. And then I wondered to myself, it felt almost as if Hale, and we know this isn't true, but it almost felt like as if Hale never got his hands dirty ever. And you know, you mentioned that there's very little background, you know, about his how he got his fortune and stuff like that. But what I find remarkable is I just don't believe that he would be punished. And maybe it did happen, but I'm not quite sure for dramatic effect it's effective for him to be hitting him with the paddle that way in you know in the lodge. You know, I'm not that convinced by that. Does this look realistic to you? I feel like he might have taken a knife and stuck it in his hand or something, but not a paddle. What do
Yeah,
you think?
that felt very humorous. Like they were trying to get a laugh out of it. And it's like you're taking it to the Masonic Lodge and you're going to invoke the morals of the Masons when you're trying to engage in a murderous conspiracy, and you're specifically upset because the little side scam he pulled with the Bucky or a Blackie, you know, was nearly exposed to the fact that they're trying to feel out for who they could use to bomb Bill and Rita's plan. And I'm like, and you took him to a Masonic lodge to make this point. It felt, and how his brother is there, just kind of going along with it, acting all like it's a formal thing. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. Plus, he's not. Plus, Ernest isn't a Mason, so why are you bringing non-Masons into the lodge? Like, it doesn't really track.
I got really scared because of the position that he was in. And I said, we've seen other films where men are put like in where they're forced to kind of bend over like that. And I got really scared as to what I was going to see. And I'm like, nobody said anything about a scene like this in this. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. And then to see that he paddled him, I was quite like, oh, and it's like I was relieved, but at the same time, I thought to myself, okay, this is a little, this doesn't feel very harsh punishment. And also, it was unbelievable in a sense. And
Yeah.
it also made me wonder as well, this character that DiCaprio plays is, I wouldn't say that he's, a pushover necessarily. He feels very tough, and yet it's not allowed to come out. And I think I would have liked to seen him kind of like, screw you, you can't tell me what to do kind of thing. At some point fight back, realistically, the way a person would say, you can't push me around like this. I just fought a war, even though he was a cook. It doesn't matter. I just can't believe that this is the mastermind you put in this conspiracy, the head of the conspiracy. This is the mastermind, and he's such an easy pushover. That also feels a little odd to me. Now, the other thing that I was going to say is, in regards to, deciding that the point of view was going to be from I can't remember the guy's
Ernest Hale. Yeah.
yeah, in deciding that it was going to be from that point of view, I also think that it seemed like there were a lot of other people that were in this group.
Yeah, and we saw that Hale covered his tracks by, and he was, and that's another thing they don't really go into, is like, how are these people in debt to him? Because he said, like, some people, oh yeah, he promised to forgive my $600 debt and then pay me $1,000 or whatever. It's like, well, what exactly did they get in debt to him? Like, because they don't really go into, again, like, he seems to have a little cattle ranch and he's done well for himself. But like, what exactly? Because he's in a sense, he's masterminded. He's like the puppeteer. He doesn't want to get his own hands dirty. That's why he makes sure to go all the way to Fort Worth for a livestock show the weekend that the bombing's going to happen, because he doesn't want to be anywhere near there. And same when he gets other people to go killing these people. He's at home making sure he's got alibis up the yin yang. And so he's like trying to, oh, I'm just in the back, trying to be that innocent guy. But he did. Most of the people he seemed to be collaborating with were like small-time crooks and not really sharpest tools in the shed,
Yeah, and I felt almost to a point where perhaps it is true that, let's say that he is a spectacular mastermind and he's been doing this for years and years and years and getting away with it. And an unfortunate stroke of events, now he's not going to get away with it. But at the same time, you needed to see some of these other people because they felt like shadows in the night, Catherine. It felt like shadows in the night, and it felt very disconnected from Hale. It was almost as if, these other things were occurring, but he wasn't necessarily, calling the shots all the time. And I almost got the suspicion that the director might have wanted you to get the intention that people were gladly willing to go ahead and kill the Osage. And I don't want to believe that, even if it might have been true. I just think that might be going too far with the animosity here.
Well, it's because, I could easily believe that because of the racism of the time, the fact that these people just kind of stumbled into all this money, and it's not necessarily locals, it's also people who are being drawn in. Like the chief says, they're circling like vultures. They're trying to kick us off the land. No, we're going to stay here. But these people keep coming in, like arriving by train, pretending they're there for good reasons when they're really not. Because that's what I thought the movie was also going to go into more so. It's not just killers being the literal killers, but figuratively, like the ones who are swindling them out of their money and out of their land and all that type of stuff. Like when the mother says, "Oh, this is all happening because of you." She's like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, you and you're all marrying these white men who only came here for our money." And because the opening scene of the movie is the Osage lamenting the idea that their culture is going to inevitably die as they're being forcibly assimilated into the culture and married into the families and that kind of stuff. So I could believe that. Plus the fact that so many people who weren't directly involved in the conspiracy knew about it. Like when you have the secret meeting with the Hale's attorney and you see all those prominent people from town and they all knew about it. Like even after the bombing and Hale shows up to survey the damage, and the man from the allotment office is like, William, you're I think he says you're presenting yourself too much. Like you need to back off. And it's like they're all in on it because like the spat that Ernest gets it with the guy at the funeral home, when he's buying the coffins, he's like, "Hey man, I work for a living. I do all my work. None of these Osage do anything." And that's what part of it is. It's fueled by jealousy and racism and envy, and that makes it kind of like John Ramsey when he's like, "Oh, I'm not into killing anybody anymore." well, what if told you it's an Osage? Oh, well, that's another story. And it's like, and he seemed like some, dimwit prospector type guy, but he's and in the way he talks about how he became friends with Henry, and it's like he's genuinely friends with him, but he goes through with it anyway. And you have that admittedly funny moment when he's finally arrested and brought in, and they reveal that Ernest is the informant, and he's like, get out your pencils. Because he's gonna. But that's the thing, is that the people were like that. It's like, oh, the racism against the culture and against the people, and the bitterness that, oh, you guys have all this money and you didn't have to work for blah, blah, blah. Of course, they don't care about all the horrible things that they did to them to push them onto this land in the first place. And so you're seeing how that is kind of being cultivated. But again, it also goes back to the point about the atmosphere in town not really feeling like there's all these murders going on. Like, there's the only time they really allude to it is there's the scene right after Ernest and Hale find out that that Ramsey shot Henry in the back of the head instead of the front, and they're driving through town, and you see this Osage family who are packing up all of their stuff on the car and fleeing. And when Ernest and Molly moved to town, they're like, yeah, we figured it'd be safer here too. And that's really the only time in the movie that you hear that there's even a sense of people being worried about being out in the rural areas, even though we're only seeing stuff happen to the Kyle family, and then Henry Roan is the other exception. We're not really getting a feel for what's actually been going on. Again, from 1921 to 1926, it was the reign of terror. And that was the reign of terror for a reason, and this doesn't feel like that while I'm watching it.
Yeah, it is very interesting that we're not getting that level of emotion and anxiety even. Oftentimes it's almost dreamlike, where there'll be meetings and people will be sort of sitting there, and it's very almost, they take you out of the moment almost in the film.
Yeah, because it didn't feel like it was building tension or suspense. And like you said, there's no anxiety. And when the Jesse Plemons character, Tom White, knocks on the door and shows up in the first time in the movie, it's like a whole new movie starting. It doesn't feel like I wasn't going to rub my hands together. Oh yeah, let's get these guys, because it felt like we're starting over, and it kind of is, because then it goes on for another, or whatever going into all of this. But it wasn't at no point. It's like, okay, you're spoon feeding information about how this case was unfolding, but I'm not feeling the drama building as we're getting closer to the end.
Yeah, and that is very interesting that the film presents itself in this way, and certainly, I think because it doesn't present itself in this way, it was easy to label it as another type of film, and I think people had gone ahead and done that. I also want to talk to you a little bit, and you did mention the length of the film, which I felt, it got carried away in a sense, but then all of a sudden it feels like, you're now things are getting serious. Like all of a sudden, it feels like it literally is a snap and things are serious, and it feels very disjointed. However, it's very serious. So it's like it's hard to gauge when, you're like, okay, something major is going to happen. Something's going to occur, but you can't say that because, it still has this sort of airy feeling to it. And even when you're in the courtroom, almost, Catherine, even in the courtroom, it's difficult to gauge, what's happening in a sense, or the seriousness of what's going on. What do you think?
Yeah, because we don't really, because they didn't tell us that even though the court, they're hearing all the testimony of how wide the conspiracy is, back then they would only tend to charge you with like one murder, no matter how much evidence. Like, even if it was a single incident where you kill 3 people, they'd only charge you with 1. And ultimately, Hale managed to finagle 4 trials before he was finally convicted, but he was only convicted of the conspiracy to kill Henry Roan. Not all this other stuff, even though the evidence that they had on him for the conspiracy was mostly from witness testimony, from the people who did it and the people who were talking. Oh yeah, but these same people were able to provide all this other information for everything else, and it didn't get really that widely prosecuted. And so at first, when I'm watching it in the trial scenes, I thought, oh, okay, so they're bringing the entire conspiracy as a series of charges. And it's only after finding out, I can't remember if it was mentioned at the very end in the Lucky Strike thing, or if I had to look it up afterwards, that, oh, the only thing he was actually ultimately charged and convicted of was the Henry Roan murder, which is like, is that just you brushing it under the rug, or is that, because of the rules of the time, oh, we can't charge you with this or that? And you could tell that you could see everybody sitting behind the defense were just staring daggers at DiCaprio when he came in the room, whereas all the people behind the prosecution desk were just kind of looking at him, frowns on their faces, like, they really didn't like him. And then I saw Hale's friends on the jury. I'm like, oh, he's probably going to walk, but then he doesn't, because granted, they don't dramatize the verdict, which just seemed like a bad idea. It's like, really? You're going to string us along for almost 3.5 hours and you're not going to, because I'm sure the real William Hale was probably surprised that he finally did get convicted, given the atmosphere of the time in terms of people just not really caring about everything that was going on. And yet we don't get to see that. And the Lucky Strikes ending, I get that Scorsese's trying to say, see, they don't take it seriously. They treat it as a joke. It's like, well, you can't really say that here, because Hoover used that show for all of the FBI cases that were solved back then. Because he was trying to, play up the FBI as this really great, thing. And, oh, we solved all these cases. It's not that they did it because, oh, they were Osage and they didn't care. It's that he's just trying to play up the FBI's image. So it was not a very satisfying, way to wrap up the story. It felt almost like they got tired of telling the story. So let's just, end it. I'm like, really?
It was maybe one of the most disappointing things I saw in the film and it was very jarring. Like it didn't go smoothly. It felt very jarring. And, the tone was just so off in it. I think that the tone of it could have been done differently, maybe even somewhat more muted. And as you and I had already discussed, Catherine, maybe newspaper clippings or newspaper headlines might have also told the story, someone listening to it and then shutting it off, and saying, well, nobody cares about that, but the way that it was presented, it just had such an odd feeling. It felt so weird. And I think what made it even weirder was, unfortunately, when Martin Scorsese comes out,
Yeah.
I'm certainly not, this is his vision and he's an artist and I get that. So, this is not what I'm talking about. But I looked at it and I said, oh man, this feels so funny and odd. What did you think about that?
Well, he had 2 voice cameos earlier in the film that I instantly picked up on. Like when the private detective gets the message at the hotel in Washington, D.C. that look out, the guy who gives it to him, you hear the voice of Scorsese. And then you hear him, I can't remember the second one, but you hear him later on in the movie, I think, as a postman as well. And so seeing him actually walk on stage, because he said in the press junket, this is a very personal story for me. And he's like, oh, when Molly died in 1937, there was no mention of the murders. And I'm like, well, not really surprised. The obituary is about her. It's not necessarily going to dive into that, but he's trying to make the point that, oh, well, nobody really cares. And that Lucky Strikes thing begins with the announcer guy saying, and that ends the story of those. It's like, no, it doesn't. That's just one case. It's like what happened to the tribal chief was talking about how they were down in scores and hundreds. Like, what happened to that? What happened to the actual conspiracy? Like, they didn't mention the fact that in 1925, the Congress finally passed a law prohibiting non-Osage from inheriting the head rights, even if they married into the families, which is something that did curtail a lot of the murders. But it didn't feel like, it's like Scorsese keeps talking about this movie as if it's about the whole massive conspiracy, and it's really not. It's just about this one family. And the way they ended Molly's story, even, where it's like, tell me the truth, and he won't tell her that, and she just kind of walks off. And she did get remarried and, got to live, I guess somewhat of a, sad, tragic, obviously, because her whole family got murdered, but, able to live with some semblance of peace away from Ernest. But it didn't really show that either. And just having the director walk on stage when he's that recognizable and he's talking about how sad this is for Molly. And it's like, well, what about everybody else in this conspiracy that you didn't really, not highlight in the sense that, obviously you can't name every specific individual. But again, it didn't really go into how this systematically went down and just took everything away from these people. Like, I figured the killers of the Flower Moon are everybody who's in on it. The ones who are charging them up the money, the ones who are swindling out of the land, the guardians who aren't giving them their money, and then creditors against it to try and bankrupt. Those are the people that I think I thought that the film was going to highlight some more, and instead it really doesn't. So it just felt disappointing that if you're going to keep the story focused on the Kyle family, and the big surprise is that the main villain did actually go to prison, then maybe you should dramatize the verdict. Because that feels like that would be a more proper conclusion to that part of the story than just randomly cutting to. It's like they have him at the trial. It's like, okay, you've said at the beginning of this trial, you trick the audience with the plot twist that, oh, Ernest may not testify after all. You reveal, nope, he's going to testify anyway. Great. But we don't really get to see the payoff of that, because it then cuts over to the separate thing with Ernest and Molly. And by this point in this film, Molly's been sort of absent for so long because she's been, practically comatose in that bed for like the last hour of the movie. So it just felt really a bit sloppy at the end there, the way they're tying it up.
Yeah, the wrap up was, I also felt very disjointed, and I'd say sloppy and disjointed, and and I understand his desire to talk about that, and I think what could have been done is that he could have ended the film and then spoken, let the film come to its conclusion, but his insertion in the film, it felt awkward, and it felt, I'm gonna say, preachy, or even, kind of removes me from just like enjoying his art, if you will. And so I think one of the major things about this film that I noticed is that you are removed a lot from the film, because what they wanted to do was to show the Osage in all their beauty and splendor. That's what they wanted to do in this film. And of course you want to do this if you are a director and you have the opportunity, this beautiful opportunity to show an incredible people. But that suddenly became, for me, more of a focus. I just forgot about a lot of what was going on. So when there would unfortunately be these acts of violence, it would be shocking to me, because I'm like, why did that happen? I'm like, oh wait, this is called Killers of the Flower Moon. That's right. They're murders that happen. So I almost have to remind myself that even, in between these sort of beautiful scenes, or, impressions of beautiful scenes, or whatever they're supposed to be, I'm supposed to be building up this terrible tension all the while, but it didn't happen for me. I think for a lot of people, it was an enjoyable film. And I could see how this film could be shown in classrooms and, of adults, not children, to educate people about the occurrence. But overall, I think it missed a lot for me. What do you think, Catherine?
Yeah, I think to your point about it not feeling the tension is because they tell you exactly who's doing it from the beginning, at least for the Kyle family. But it goes back to what the other tribal chief said. He's like, "Hey, I fought in the Boxer Rebellion. I could see my enemy. If we knew who was doing it, we would be killing them." And granted, they know, figuratively speaking, who's doing it. It's these people who are coming in and trying to take, but they don't know literally who's doing it. So if you told the story from the Osage perspective, it would be that would have a lot more tension and suspense, because you wouldn't really know. It's like, well, is it Hale? He's so friendly and he gives us all this free stuff and he helps us out and all that kind of thing. And yeah, there's these other people who are clearly here just for the money, upcharging us in these businesses, but they're making so much money off the business. Are they really going to get involved in the murder? It's like, that would cultivate more of a mystery behind it. And you could individually reveal to the audience who the actual killers are without revealing who the mastermind is. So then you kind of have to figure out what's going on. Because again, like the chief says, if we knew who was doing this, laws be damned, we know how much we can't trust the American justice system. We would have dealt with this ourselves, like backyard, old frontier justice. So I think that would have added a lot more tension to this that way, because that way you could still have the De Niro characters sort of front and center, and the audience would be kind of wondering, well, is he kind of in on it? Is it? And we wouldn't really be sure, because you'd have all this massive ensemble, but it would have more of an Osage perspective on it, and that way we would also get to see more of the Osage culture, like what was actually going on during this time, how else were they protecting themselves, like what was the tribal chief leading them up to during these couple of years that the film takes place over. But it didn't really do that, because it's just focusing on Ernest and Hale, and because they tell you from the beginning exactly what they're doing and why they're doing it and how they're doing it, and it's so blatant about it, it doesn't really leave room to build tension or suspense around it.
Now, with that being said, and Catherine, you and I have a very similar experience to this film, and there are a lot of people in the chat who also love the film, and we are happy that you love the film. We certainly, I think that it's great. As I said, they made this film. I'm very happy that this film was made. But with this being said, Catherine, I want to see more films with De Niro and DiCaprio and Gladstone. I think they've hit on a very special trio here. I'd like to see a bunch of films. And if they're Westerns, they're Westerns. If they're thrillers, they're thrillers. Whatever they are, they were really good together in this film. And even the scenes where De Niro is with Gladstone, are magical. You know, I think that that's such a fantastic combination of these three actors. Are we going to get this? I am so desperate to see more with these three actors together. What do you think?
I don't know if we're going to see those three together. I know DiCaprio is a lot more selective on what he does these days. De Niro seems to be doing all sorts of stuff, so he'd probably be into it. Lily Gladstone, I would hope, is going to get more attention and more roles after this, as well as the other actors in the film. Like the ones who played her sisters were really good, and that was just that whole ensemble. It's like, cast those four again to play sisters and something else, like maybe something more happy or something, because they are really good. And the performances are great. The craftsmanship and the production value is really great. I just think that it's way too long. It doesn't have tension or suspense. And the lack of an Osage perspective primarily, and the weird way that they're trying to get you to, get in Ernest's corner at the end is just kind of icky. And it's like, I mean, initially I gave it a 4 out of 5. And then I thought, maybe I'm leaning more towards 3.5, because I've seen it twice now. And it still is a bit of a chore to get through it. And it's like each time it's going on, it's like it's not like I'm gaining more information, because they didn't get into all these details, so to speak, that I was more aware of. Again, reading up on news articles, which have been, as often happens when a historical film comes out, you have actual journalists do their research. And it's like, wow. Like, I read the official FBI report, which is pretty long. And that really dives into a lot of the ins and outs of the case that are really fascinating. That would have been interesting to see dramatized, but wasn't. And so, yeah, I still think it's a really good movie. I think it should sweep all of the, production design, like the costumes, makeup, hair, like it should have that covered at the Oscars next year. I think Robert De Niro is going to get a supporting actor nomination, if not lead actor, however they categorize it. He was really good. Again, I think it's one of his best performances in a really, really long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even though DiCaprio has also played a villain before, like in Wolf of Wall Street, this character just feels a lot more despicable, because it just how effortless it is that he just decides to do this out of nowhere. And the way he's talking to Blackie when he's first recruiting him, they frame Blackie almost like he's not that smart, but he actually really is. Like, he's listening to the scheme when he's first. It's like, this sounds like it's really great for you, not for me. He's like, well, they'll pay you $1,000. That ain't really much. Well, I'll give you my car and the insurance thing on the side. It's like, oh, okay, now you're kind of talking. And I love that money. I love that Osage money. And it's like, you've been here for what, like a few weeks, and you're already talking about. Well, by then it was probably a few years, because they don't really orient you very well on the timeline. Because I think he first showed up there to meet his uncle in 1919, and I know Anna was murdered in late May 1921, and then the other murders that they show in the film were in 1923. So it's a bit and they rearranged some of the scenes, because I know that a lot of stuff happens between Anna's murder and the mother's murder. And in the movie they left it a bit ambiguous, almost as if the mother had died of old age or something. But in reality, they think that she was poisoned.
I didn't get that from the film, Catherine. I thought the owl came to get her soul or something, and it was a beautiful passing.
Yeah, they did mention in the aftermath in the official case that they suspected she was actually poisoned, which I thought was interesting that they said that, because the way the scam worked, he said it was important for the other sisters to die first before the mother, because that way the mother would inherit their head rights, and then she would undoubtedly alter her will to ensure that Molly got it.
Oh, right.
But the fact that the mother died before Rita and the other sisters made me think that, well, why does the FBI think she got poisoned? Because if this is, again, Hale's plan, then Hale would want to keep her alive after, for that. So maybe she wasn't, maybe she was, because they said her symptoms were similar to the mysterious wasting illness, which of course doesn't exist in humans. It's poison. Mm-hmm. And if the FBI had exhumed some of the bodies from the cemetery and taken them to other doctors, they may have gotten something, obviously nothing from the veins anymore, but some evidence from the organs, maybe, that there was something there. And then you had that really sick scene when the FBI is asking, so why did you cut up the body? Well, we were looking for the bullet. I'm like, right, but you thought the bullet was in the head. Why did you cut up the torso and the legs? And it's like, yeah, why did they do that? It's like, I can't even think of what type of scam, like, how are you even making money? Like, what are you doing with that? Like, that doesn't, it's so perverse. And that scene where Molly is sitting next to them while they're doing that is so hard to watch. That, to me, that was probably the hardest scene to watch in the whole movie.
Hmm.
But even then, it's like, okay, I get these doctors are corrupt and they're evil, and like when they tell Hale, oh Hale, I don't know, this giving Henry an insurance policy, this is a really hard one to justify. But like, what were they trying to do by cutting up her body that way? Other than the brain where you're trying to find the bullet, okay. But the rest of it's like, ew, this is really gross. Like, well, these guys are just, and it seemed like the FBI was hitting them on that, but the real guys, they never did bring them to trial. I would expect that they were probably run out of town, which seems like that would have been logical, that people would have picked up on the fact that, oh, these guys, we can't trust them, you know?
Yeah, and I presumed that the body was unfortunately mutilated and kind of cut into parts, unfortunately, to hide damage that was done to the body, abuse and beatings or whatever. So, you know, you can't make a determination of that when you've already taken the body and desecrated it that way. But it is a very interesting film. Certainly not what I was expecting. And, you know, I would say certainly anybody who has not seen the film, go ahead and see Killers of the Flower Moon. I think there is some value to the film, but you know, I think it really is going to fall onto a lot of individuals who will like the film. Certainly, one thing that's undeniable is the performances are amazing and the film looks amazing. So
they had a lot of great actors also aside. Like, I know the guy who played Bill, you know, Bill and Rhea. Bill was a country music singer.
yes,
that other country music singer is the rodeo guy, Henry, who helped procure the bomber, who was the real guy, was admitted to the or enshrined in the National Rodeo Hall of Fame in the year 2000. It's like, you involved in a savage murders like this, and oh yeah, it's cool, you were a great rodeo star. It's like, that's kind of icky, you know, and how people forget, which is sort of something that Hale mentions at one point in the movie. Like when Ernest is like, no, the Osage aren't going to stand with you anymore, Uncle. And he's like, no, you just watch. People will make noise for a while, but then they'll forget, which seems to be what happened historically, because people forgot, because eventually the oil boom ended there. And it's sad that if you look at Fairfax today, it looks really, you know, worse for wear, run down. It's not the, you know, flushed with money and people like it used to be. Not like Pawhuska by comparison, which is another city they mentioned, which is further east. And a nice fun fact is that after the King Ranch eventually got broken up and sold when he went to prison, the Osage did eventually get that land back. They had to buy it back though, but they did eventually get it back several decades later. But geez, still a sad story. And I think it'll inspire people who haven't seen the movie yet. When they see it, it'll inspire them to do their own research on it and just see how widespread and just how crazy this was.
I think you're right about that. And I also think it'll inspire other creators to remake this film, because there's a lot more to the story that we haven't seen, Catherine, as you mentioned. I think other creators will want to go ahead and do something like that as well.
Right, because the way this got even came about was that the author was there in Oklahoma. He went to the museum and he saw this picture that was kind of cut off. It was a picture from 1924 that shows all the people in town all gathered together. And he's like, he asked the curator, why is this photo cut like this? He's like, oh, that's because the devil was in the picture and we didn't want him there. It's like, what are you talking about? It's like, can I see it? And they're like, yeah. So they bring up the complete photo and he shows him that guy. And he's like, and she tells him the story. And then he goes to the cemetery and he sees how there's a disproportionate amount of deaths between 1921, 1926, around there. And the curator put him in contact with the granddaughter of Ernest and Molly, who told him the whole story specifically about her family, which is why the book and the movie are subsequently about her family. And she mentions that she did get to meet Ernest in 1986, shortly before he died. That's right. He lived all the way to 1986. That is insane, to be killing the family 65 years earlier. You have the luxury of having this long life and getting a full pardon by the governor, which is, hey, I cooperated, so I should get a pardon. So disgusting. And that he would play the role of the nice, quiet, harmless grandpa. But she's like, no, I knew, I could just imagine how many cousins I probably would have today if it wasn't for him and his evil brother, who, I mean, in the movie, it seems like the brother knows about it, but he's hands-on in the Anna murder, but not, and he never went to prison because he got a hung jury as to whether or not he was involved with Anna, and so, or with killing her, and so he never had to face justice for that, really. And so it's just, God, you read that and it's like, that just, it makes me sick. And the fact that Hale got out in 1947 and routinely went back to visit his family in Osage County when he was told you're not allowed to go back there, And granted, he ended up dying and somehow made his way to Arizona by, I think, 1950 and died there in 1962. But again, the guy lived another 15 years. And I mean, he was 87, like something like almost 87 years old. I'm like, that is just, it's like, no, how is this not a death penalty case? You know, like maybe because it was a he said, she said ultimately, but it's such a, and that's some of the stuff that Scorsese doesn't really go into when they're wrapping up the story at the end, mentioning the random facts. He's like, oh, Ernest got out of jail in 1937, but they didn't mention he went back in 1941 because he robbed one of Molly's other distant relatives, like one of her cousins or something like that, in 1941. And he got caught, and he went back to prison for another 18 years before getting paroled, I think, in 59 and getting his pardon in 67. But it's like, I just, and he had the fact that he had the gall to tell an interviewer very late in life, hey man, I'm as innocent as you. I was just a messenger. I was just sending messages around. I didn't do nothing. It's like, I can't with these people. And that's probably why the movie even feels longer to me, because of just how despicable this guy is. Like, yeah, he's kind of dim, but he's not that dim. He knows what he's doing. And like, it's just,
Exactly. I agree 100% with everything you said. And certainly it does bring more attention to the story. And like I said, I would encourage people to go see it. You know, you'll take what you can from the film. And Catherine, thank you so much for joining me tonight to review Killers of the Flower Moon. Catherine, where can people find you?
You can find me Slice Night at Letterboxd, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. You can find me on the Fantasmagorium show currently every Thursday. That's a Fantasmagorium show YouTube channel. Currently every Thursday night, we're reviewing the Fargo TV series. It's really fun. And every second and fourth Sunday of the month on the Virtual Cantina Network YouTube channel, you can find me co-hosting Unifying Force, which is a Star Wars talk show relating spiritualism and religion to Star Wars, which is really fun. And so you can find me there.
Excellent. And guys, of course, you can always find me here on the Burnettwork, but you can always find me on my YouTube channel, Positive Fandom, at any time. And also, I want to thank our moderator, Tom Jr. Jackson, who also has his YouTube channel. Guys, please do check him out there. Thank you for everything you do, Tom. We are all goof people. I want to thank everybody in the chat for letting us know all your thoughts about the film. Thank you for sharing that. It's such a pleasure to see you all tonight. Thank you so much for the kind words, guys. And guys, remember, no matter where you are in the galaxy, always remember to please be kind. Take care, everybody.